Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the privilege of your subscription. And of course, to everyone who's watching, if you enjoy this video, be sure to click that thumbs up button. That's a way to tell YouTube to promote videos like mine. It also tells YouTube the type of videos that you like to watch. And as a result, YouTube will suggest videos that are similar. And you may find yourself discovering videos and channels that you didn't even know exist that are geared towards your interests. Also, if you would like to help support this channel financially so that I'll keep making these videos, you can visit eGuitarPlants.com. There's a link in the description below, or you can visit my merch store, which is displayed below the description for this video. And there you can make purchases which will help support the channel, plus you'll be getting something in return. And last but not least, if you would like to support the channel financially but don't necessarily want to buy something, you can click that thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you like. So, in today's video, I am going to try and answer a question that was posed by a viewer recently. He wanted to know, when it comes to making a neck with an angled headstock, which is better, to carve the neck and the headstock out of one big thick slab of wood, or is it better to use a scarf joint to make that angled headstock? And really, the answer to that question is either way works just fine. The decision to either carve it out of a thick slab of wood, like this slab of maple that I have, or to make a scarf joint to make that angled headstock is largely dependent upon the species of wood that you're going to make the neck out of, as well as the dimensions of the blank that you're going to use. So if you're able to source a nice big thick slab of wood like this maple, you can fairly easily carve a one-piece neck with an angled headstock out of that piece of wood. If, however, you can't source a piece of wood that thick, if let's say all you can get is 4/4 or 5/4 wood, then you may have no choice but to use a scarf joint in order to form that angled headstock. Now, there's also a philosophical component here. Some folks think that carving the neck out of that, big thick slab of wood results in a more premium high-end guitar. And the scarf joint to them usually means that the guitar is cheaper, not as high-end or high quality. And really that's just nonsense, because it doesn't make any difference in terms of tone and sustain. It can, however, make a difference in terms of strength and durability, but that's really related more to the choice of the wood species that you're going to use. If a guitar neck is going to be made out of maple and you can't source that thicker wood, you can use the scarf joint, but it really isn't necessary with maple, because maple is very strong and durable. So you can carve the entire neck out of a thick slab of wood, and the result is going to perform just fine. You're not going to have any issues with strength and durability. With other types of wood, such as mahogany, there can be an issue of strength and durability with regards to that angled headstock, because if you carved a neck out of a single thick slab of mahogany, the grain is going to be running across the thickness of the headstock, and that's called short graining. And as a result, it's a bit weaker. So if you bump the headstock against an amplifier, or if it falls off a guitar stand, or God forbid gets handled or mishandled by the airline luggage handlers, the headstock can snap because of that short graining. But if you do a scarf joint and you do it correctly, the grain will run along its entire length, making it much more durable. And that's especially true if you source a piece of quarter sawn wood for the neck. You know, that grain orientation will help make that headstock much, much stronger. And of course, if you're doing inline tuners, you're going to have a longer headstock than you would if you were doing 3 on each side. That makes for a shorter headstock, which is going to be a little bit stronger, a little more durable, and less susceptible to breakage. When they get really long, they can tend to be a bit weaker. Also, there's the issue of what that angle is going to be. Some folks like a fairly shallow angle, which is what I like, and others go for a much steeper angle. And the angle, there's really no rule of thumb here. It's more philosophical than anything else. Some people think that a steeply angled headstock is going to give you better tension on the strings where the strings pass through the nut slots, so they're not going to be as prone to popping out of the slots when you're playing the guitar. But I've found that, even with a fairly shallow angle, it still works just fine. So typically when you're talking about angled headstocks, you're looking at anywhere from about 10 degrees, which is a shallow angle, to a much steeper angle of about 17 degrees. And that's typically what you find on a lot of Gibson guitars. And I think really it has to do more with the orientation of the tuners. If you're doing inline tuners and it's really long, you can go with a shallower angle on the headstock than if you're doing 3x3 and it's a shorter headstock. You're going to probably want to tilt that angle a little bit more than you would with the inline tuners. That way you get the string tension that you need to keep the strings in the slots at the nut. So, but again, that's a philosophical consideration. I've actually made angled headstocks that were less than 10 degrees, like 8 degrees, and had no issues with the string tension over or through the slots in the nut. So really, I think it just comes down to a matter of personal preference. It also kind of has a little bit to do with the aesthetic. I don't like the look of a steeply angled headstock. I think it looks like you bumped into something and bent the headstock back. It just looks weird to me. But I think that the shallower angle of, say, 10 degrees, it looks more natural, and it just feels right for me. So that's what I typically will go with. So really, like I said, what it comes down to when making that decision as to whether to do a scarf joint or carving out a single slab of wood is the species of wood and the dimensions of the blank. And as far as like the species is concerned, you need to look at how strong that wood is. How well does it resist rupture and bending and that sort of thing. And maple, you'll notice, is much stronger, much more stable. So you can get away with carving the entire neck and headstock out of a single thick slab. However, if it's mahogany, you're going to find that you're going to probably want to do a scarf joint, because the scarf joint will yield stronger grain orientation in the headstock and will be less susceptible to breakage. But it's also important to understand that when you're doing a scarf joint, there are different ways that you can place or position the scarf joint. And if you look at this neck closely, I'll try and get some better angles with the camera, you can see where the glue seam is for the scarf joint. And I've positioned it in the neck shaft itself. And I did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I get more glue area to make that joint. So it's going to be stronger and more durable. But I've also, by placing it back here, I've concealed it. You can't see it from the front because it's obviously covered by the fretboard. You can also position a scarf joint further down the neck and in the headstock area itself. And that actually yields a very strong angled headstock, but it results in a glue seam which will run across the width of the headstock. So in order to conceal that, you would have to use a headstock cap. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of guitar makers use headstock caps. They try and conceal a seam that resulted from doing the scarf joint. So either way, it works. But what I find interesting about the whole argument as to whether to carve a neck out of a solid piece of wood or to do an angled headstock is that idea that carving it from the single piece of wood is more premium than doing the scarf joint. And the truth is, to make a scarf joint involves many more steps. It is much more complicated to do, and it requires a very high level of craftsmanship in order to pull it off correctly. So that idea that somehow a scarf joint is cheaper just doesn't make sense to me. So, you know, unfortunately, you can't always change the minds of people once they're made up on a topic of what's premium and what isn't. So I'm not even going to attempt to do that. But I've made necks using scarf joints in different locations, and I do a lot of carving necks out of these big thick slabs of wood. Now I prefer to carve a neck out of a thick slab of wood because it's easy for me to do since I'm using a CNC machine to make the neck. All I have to do is create the 3D file, assign the tool paths, write the G code, and then install the blank onto my CNC machine and send that G code file, and it will carve out that shape of the neck. So there aren't a lot of steps involved, and it's fairly simple and easy for me to do. So that's what I prefer to do. But, you know, if I'm going to be making a neck out of mahogany, I am going to be more inclined to use a scarf joint because I know that that headstock will be stronger and more durable. So those are sort of the things to consider. It really has nothing to do with one method or the other yielding better tone and sustain, because if I were to make a neck with a scarf joint and then make another neck out of a solid piece and then compare the two on the same guitar, you'd be hard pressed to tell that there's any difference. And I don't have any scientific evidence to back that up, but nobody's going to waste the time to do a scientific study on which method of construction is better, because it's pointless. So put that out of your mind, and from going forward, when it comes to deciding what method of construction you're going to use, it's all going to depend on the species of wood and the dimensions of the blank that you can purchase to make your neck. So I hope you found this video to be useful. I know it's pretty talky, but that's really the nature of this subject. So if you enjoy the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Visit eguitarplans.com or my merch store down below if you'd like to help support the channel. Click the thanks button, leave a tip, all that good stuff. And hopefully I will see you in the next episode. So until then, take care and stay safe.